I want to, I think it's important. Where's Dr. Roy Smith? I'm going to do this a little bit different. Come on up here. I think they need to see you as we're saying these things in case they want to throw something. I think it's important that we stand up as men, don't you? Give this man a hand. Stand up here, buddy. He's a very special man. And he's done some very special things. And I think what we have seen here at the NCMM in the last 5 years that he's been a part of this organization is just merely the tip of the iceberg. I want to tell you some stories about this man because I want you to know his heart. And I want you to know this man deeply like I do. 38 years ago, God launched him into really a ministry, but a counseling ministry that he began out of his house, bringing patients into his house, because of the passion that he had to try to fix primarily men. Many of those had criminal records. Many of those had already destroyed families. Many of those were already in the process of destroying their families. That small little beginning of a ministry from his house has now emerged into a counseling service that employs over 600 counselors in 8 counties in central Pennsylvania. But that wasn't enough for Roy. About 8 years ago, his church asked him, because they found themselves void of a curriculum in the men's ministry, if he would use his skills that he had developed in working with men and try to translate those from the counseling, but to make them relevant for men with the idea, can we fix them before we let them get broken and destroy families? Can we start raising men at this level here instead of trying to fix them after their life comes apart? For 2 years, he wrote curriculum, and the little men's ministry in his local church grew to a small group of about 1,000 guys meeting each week. I know that's small for a lot of you men in your ministries on your weekly meetings, but that was pretty good for a young guy like this, just getting started with a foothold in the big city, you know what I mean? And it was after those first 2 years that God put it on his heart for him to take this, create a ministry that could be then reproducible in the hands of others. And let me tell you what that has looked like. In those 6 years since those few men gathered in that weekly men's meeting of 1,000 guys, small as it may have been, it has now grown to 300 churches across the country and a couple around the world. But let me tell you what else. It's in 15 prisons, and I was with this man in his home when I thought it was the end of the day. And he says, come on, Chuck, we have one more stop. And he rents a wing at the hospital where he puts people, and they're given the choice really between, you can go to jail or go to this process here. And a lot of them, strangely enough, choose to go into this program there. And then as I was sitting with Roy, because one of these things that God just keeps working on him and beating him up, that not being content in a sense with where he's at. He flies back tomorrow because he has a meeting tomorrow night, and a major meeting with the county officials, all of this being secular in nature, with the county officials to have a day release program where convicted criminals, let's just use the word, because you don't get convicted if you're not, can do a day report system with him and his staff. So he anticipates in one county alone that it could start off with as many as 150 convicted men who would then elect to go into this program where they would be allowed to stay at home with reporting systems that would require them to come in. And one of the opportunities they will have under this is to sit in a very dark room and read self-help books, or the other choice is they might elect to go through Knights of the 21st Century. I don't know how he comes up with this, but tradition has it that when he's given a lot of men these opportunities, they somehow, for whatever reason, have chosen Knights of the 21st Century. But in that process as well, with men who have been convicted, with men whose lives have been changed, who have destroyed families, he has seen what God has given him through Knights of the 21st Century to radically change lives, restore families. But let me just tell you that here's what you need to know. Most of us have the tendency to work in the mainstream with men. Let's just say the truth and be happy with that. We're working in churches, we're invited to do men's events and so forth. He's not in that world. His world is people that are in counseling. His world that are people in prison. His world that are people with some severe problems that have had them institutionalized. He and his wife Jan have 2 beautiful children. And I will tell you this, when we think, well, gosh, everybody in ministry, our lives are just about perfect. He's not one of those men. His son has Down syndrome, requires 24-hour care, and Roy is one of the 24-hour caregivers for his own son. He has a daughter that grew up in the ministry with him, who's a professional counselor, and by the grace of God, in a month, he'll be a grandpa. And if you think he looks old now, wait till he's a grandpa. So it is with great pleasure, a very distinct honor of mine personally with a friend of mine, to say to you, Dr. Roy Smith, the National Coalition of Ministries to Men, on this night recognizes Knights of the 21st Century, specifically Dr. Roy Smith, as the established Men's Ministry of the Year by your peers in this organization of over 200 members as the Men's Ministry of the Year. My friend, God bless you and thank you.
Thank you. So I'm reading yesterday, David, and the kinds of guys that came to him. Isolated, imperfect, and ignored, marginalized. One of the things I like about NCMM, and it's the time period I've been in as I've watched it grow and just develop, is that our message is sacred. Our methodology is not. And we have to create relationships, and just D and the other guy, Raze, or however you say his name about Islam, we're creating ways where we're not worried about the methodology, and we're allowing more and more creativity and methodology so that we can get across that sacred message to men who showed up with David, who were ignorant, imperfect, and isolated. And we're creating an environment in various ways, all of you, whereby Jesus Christ, the sacred message, can meet them. This award, if you look at life, despite the passivity we talked about last night, I would add another thing. We males tend to be narcissistic. And in our narcissism as leaders, which we all, if we're honest, struggle with, we have to come to the realization that nobody accomplishes anything without other teammates there. And so this represents hundreds of men volunteering, traveling all over the country. Women who realize what it's like to be married to a man versus a male, who have dedicated hours upon hours to get our message out. And so I thank the group for this honor, and I want to thank you for honoring as well the team behind the honor, because without that team of folks, including my family who knows the way to the airport and back with their eyes closed, it wouldn't be here. So thank you very much.